Hello friends. Welcome to the Eastern Front channel. Today we will talk with you about the memoirs of Friedrich Paulus adjutant, Arno von Lenski, who fought with Paulus until he was captured in 1943. At the end of October, the land between the Don and the Volga lay under thick fog all day long. The reconnaissance activity of the Luftwaffe was completely immobilized. We had no exact picture of what the enemy was up to. At last came a few clear autumnal days, offering good visibility. The first flights over the area on the northern flank confirmed what our divisions had reported from their observations. Excitedly we pored over the aerial photographs. The Red Army had strongly extended their bridgeheads over the Don, especially in the area of Serafimovich. Several new bridges had been erected, some of them underwater bridges whose surface lay beneath the water level so as to reduce their visibility. We were standing near Colonel Elchlep in front of the big situation map. From the north, from about Voronezh, the front line followed the Don generally eastwards, crossed it south of Shishkin and reached the Volga north of Rhynok. This enormous, 600-kilometer-long flank was held by just two of our corps and the badly equipped armies of our allies. The run of the front south of Stalingrad looked no calmer. A mighty hole gaped between the 4th Panzer Army and the Romanian 4th Army, the right-hand neighbor of the 6th Army, and the German units in the Caucasus. On a front-line sector of about 400 kilometers stood the widely dispersed 16th, Motorized, Infantry Division. Not unjustifiably, it bore the nickname of the Steppe Fire Brigade. Parallel to this, the enemy front was shown as a red line on the map. In front of the 6th Army's left flank and the Romanian 3rd Army, as well as in front of the right wing of the 4th Panzer Army, was shown a mass of Soviet units. General Paulus put one hand on the northern mass of enemy troops, the other on the southern, and then he pushed his hands together as if shutting a trap. What lay inside the trap, what was cut off by the arms of the trap, was us, our 6th Army. Elchlep commented laconically, "If Hitler whistles at our proposals again in this dangerous situation, the catastrophe is complete." The nervous tension among the army staff increased. After supper I escorted Paulus to his quarters. Both of us hardly noticed when we left the village street, nevertheless a little later we were standing on the bank of the Don. For a short time our eyes roved over the surface of the water, then Paulus broke the silence. "You know my requests, Adam. Hitler has rejected everything, the suspension of the fighting in Stalingrad, and the release of the 14th Panzer Corps from the city. He went through the orders given to me at Veneza on the September 12th and demanded the speeding up of the taking of the city by all means. That way we bleed, but that is not all. Stalingrad could become the 6th Army's canny." The last sentence seemed as if he had spoken to himself. For several minutes he stood sunk in thought, as if he had forgotten me. Then he stroked his brow with his right hand, as if he wanted to brush away the tormenting thoughts. His thin figure stretched itself. "Let us concern ourselves with what we can do. When will the first young officers be available? You know how urgently we need them. Dozens of companies are being led by non-commissioned officers. I was in Suvorovsky yesterday. At first the young cadets were not happy about being transferred to the infantry, but now their hearts are all for it." Captain Goebel also reported that they were making good progress. I can confirm that from my own impressions. Unfortunately the course had a late start. We can finish at the end of the month at the earliest. In addition, the taking over command by Colonel Abraham at Suvorovsky has worked out well. His original humor and his rich experiences are priceless. With this he has regained his health himself. I regret today that I agreed to a later ending of the course. See to it that whatever happens, they are ready by the November 30th. We directed our steps back to the village. It was becoming frosty. Was this only due to the cool of the evening, or was this a terrible warning? At headquarters the usual reports were set out. Nothing unusual there, still nothing. At 10 p.m. hours the connection to the corps became available. There were casualty reports, decorations, promotions, officer postings, always the same, I thought. Among the ruins of the Volga city in the middle of November I had some business to do with the 71st Infantry Division. One of its regimental commanders, Colonel Rosk, was an old acquaintance of mine. Until the outbreak of the war, we had both been teachers of tactics at the war school in Dresden. Now Rosk was with his staff in Stalingrad, his regiment right on the bank of the Volga. I accompanied him there. Seeing the devastated state of the city for the first time from bombing and close-quarter fighting, Schiller's words came to me: horror lives in the empty window frames. Ruins, nothing but ruins, in the cellars among them huddled soldiers. Bomb craters and heaps of rubble made the once smooth street virtually impassable. Glass splinters, window casemates, bits of machines, wrecked cars, bedding, remains of furniture. Cooking utensils, stoves, electricity cables, tram cables, an inconceivable jumble of destroyed and damaged objects of all kinds. Rosk and I moved forward only with difficulty. No one could say exactly where the front line ran in this rubble. Enemy troops could appear suddenly behind our soldiers at any time. Death lay behind every ruin and at every crossroads. Rosk was a good guide through the rubble, dust, and glass splinters. After about half an hour, the view opened up. We were standing in a covered trench on the western, steeply falling bank of the Volga. The mighty stream was more than 2 kilometers wide. It looked almost like a lake, and was a bit misty. Only if one strained one's eyes hard could one faintly see the outline of the far bank. To the right of us, a big wooded island appeared in the middle of the powerful stream. Its southern end attracted our attention. Rosk said that during the night our sentries had been pushed back to the Volga bank. Now there was no ship, no boat to be seen on the water. Some German pilots who were keeping a watch over the river had nothing to do. The dive bombers had more to do, diving steeply on the east bank and the island, their targets being enemy mortars and troop concentrations. They fired their cannon as they dropped their bombs. I stood astounded at the enormous dimensions of the river landscape. After the broad expanse of the steppe came the width of the river, then the city. It had 600,000 inhabitants, the factory workers alone amounting to 10,000. What a life there must have been here on Europe's mightiest river between the Caucasus and Moscow. The taking of machine gun fire interrupted my thoughts. Hand grenades exploded to our left, and then, with dull thuds, the artillery joined in the battle. While we were standing here in the protection of the trench, bodies were being torn apart by the shelling only a few dozen meters away. Suddenly all was quiet again. It is often like this. The regimental commander's voice sounded next to me. A short exchange of fire, mostly in connection with some troop activity or other. Complete silence reigns over the Volga by day, but it becomes much livelier as dusk approaches. With the field glasses you can see Krasnaya Sloboda over there. Our bombers have blasted the village umpteen times, but no sooner do the first signs of dusk appear on the river than the boats are loaded with men and supplies. The Russians try to cross over to the west bank in the darkness of the night. Then comes a tremendous spectacle. Flares throw their magical light over the water, and searchlights slide their beams over the surface of the river. Should a ship or a boat be discovered, it is bathed in light and shotted by machine guns and guns of all kinds. Aircraft appear, drop their bombs and dive down firing their cannon. Nevertheless, most boats reach the bank. From prisoner of war statements we know that in the middle of October, a whole rifle division was transported across in a single night. The Russians only reduced their river traffic in bright moonlight. Rosk's regiment was involved in the close-quarter fighting, together with the whole of the 71st Infantry Division and its neighbors to the left and right. While returning to his command post, my companion described the struggle. Assault troops from the division to our left forced their way into a building and threw the Russians out of the ground floor. The enemy is still sitting in the floor above today. For days now our people have been pursuing the fighting with all their might, but have been unable to drive Ivan out. It is puzzling how he is supplied. He should have been starved out long ago and shot himself, but no. That handful of Russians has no interest in surrendering. They did not even think about it in the following weeks. The small, brave garrison held out until the German troops in this part of the city had been smashed or taken prisoner. We later discovered, from the Soviet history of the war, that this was Sergeant Pavlov's team. The Army High Command permits defensive measures on the northern flank. Paulus had applied yet again to the Army High Command for permission to abandon Stalingrad and withdraw the 6th Army behind the Don. Again his application was rejected. The attack to the death of the exhausted divisions was gradually assured. Our troops had reached the end of their strength. The last attacks in November had to be paid for with the lives of thousands, and further thousands were crippled. Only a few square meters of ruins had been gained by these attacks. The taking of the city was postponed indefinitely. But the repeated requests obtained one result from the Army High Command, which at last approved some defensive measures on the 6th Army's northern flank. The 48th Panzer Corps, inserted on the 6th Army's right wing in the city, finally handed over 2 of its divisions to the Corps. With its 3 divisions, the 29th Motorized Infantry Division became the reserve for Army Group B. Its now superfluous Corps headquarters was moved to the rear of the Romanian 3rd Army, and the 22nd Panzer Division and the Romanian 1st Tank Division were placed under its command. The commanding general of the 48th Panzer Corps was Lieutenant General Wilhelm, the former Chief of Staff of the 6th Army and an officer with whom I had long enjoyed working. Wilhelm was to act as a corset to the Romanian 3rd Army threatened by the enemy's attack preparations. General Paulus did not expect much from this. His mistrust lay not with the commanding general, but with the troops under him. "The Romanian 1st Tank Division," he said to me, "is equipped only with light French and Czech tanks. The men are not fully trained and have never been in battle." The German 22nd Panzer Division was badly decimated in the consequent fighting. Wilhelm can only have part of the remainder. Half of the Panzer Regiment has been deployed elsewhere by Army Group B. Obviously, the limited protective measures from Führer headquarters could in no way banish the most earnest worries of the Commander-in-Chief and the Chief of Staff. I discussed this with Paulus on the November 15th. The Chief of Staff was again referring to Lieutenant General Wilhelm's task. "I regard it as more than superfluous if anyone believes that Wilhelm can prevent a breakthrough by the Russians with his 2 half divisions. When will the Wehrmacht High Command and the Army High Command finally learn to gauge the strength of the enemy correctly? Then you too regard as insufficient the defensive strengths that you, General, have placed ready behind our left flank?" Of course they are insufficient. That is why I sought permission to extract the 14th Panzer Corps from the Stalingrad front. The Army High Command also turned that down, even though the tanks in the city are virtually unused. I simply don't get it, General. Such false decisions are already provoking a catastrophe. Don't condemn so harshly, Adam. The 14th Panzer Corps has received orders from me to pull back the panzer regiments and anti-tank battalions of the 16th and 14th Panzer Corps so that on demand they can immediately go to the left flank west of the Don. And what is going to happen in the south? Would the 4th Panzer Army hold if the Russians break out? Apparently, there is hardly anything left of the Panzer Army. It also has had to give up all its tanks and its infantry division. It still has the Romanian infantry divisions, which have fought bravely several times, but they are poorly armed and equipped. Everything depends upon the strength of the enemy. Should he attack with large battle-strong units, it could also be catastrophic in the south. I too fear the worst if the High Command does not produce battle-strength divisions as soon as possible, but we cannot let any panic break out. I fully understand that, but are we going to look on while doing nothing as the noose is drawn around our necks, General? Our divisions simply cannot do any more. Many of them do not even have half their fighting establishments. All these statements are of no help to us, Adam. Think of the many different situations we have already been through this year. Above all, you know the orders of the Army High Command. They are binding for me as a soldier. From my subordinates I too demand that they carry out their orders unconditionally. With this our talk came to an end. Our concerns remained, especially for Paulus. He worked restlessly, checking, visiting, speaking. He demanded the utmost from himself, but did not change his mind in doing so. The fate of the 6th Army was decided at Führer headquarters, and Paulus had accepted his orders. The first snow fell on the November 16th, the wind whistled icily over the steppe. It found no resistance in our light field greycoats. Forage caps and dice boxes were not suitable protection against the cold. Really, one should have learned from the nasty experiences of the winter of 1941-422. But by the middle of November, the 6th Army still had no adequate winter clothing. Paulus had already ordered it, as he had known that operating within the city would not be complete before the cold set in. the army's quartermaster general shared the view of our commander-in-chief. On the other hand, Hitler was of the opinion that normal winter clothing would suffice on the Eastern Front, especially since the National Socialist People's Welfare was ready with a grandiose collection of winter items, to which every member of the public had contributed, to be sent through to the soldiers on the Eastern Front. In fact, the population was prepared to contribute anything, no matter what articles of clothing, against the cold and icy wind. Enormous crates were filled with them, but the cold period had come to Stalingrad so suddenly that hardly any of the collection had reached the front, and not much got to the rear areas either. The Army Quartermaster General tried to get the delivery expedited, but with little success, the transport facilities being so limited and the overwhelming distances so great. From Milarovo, the main source of supply for the 6th Army, it was reported that a paradoxical picture had emerged when the first wagon of winter clothing was opened. Instead of the requisite woolen and knitted items, there were hundreds of ladies' coats, muffs, Persian capes and other fur items, including some very expensive ones, that were, however, completely useless at the front. Apparently, the items of clothing handed in by the civilian population had not been secured and checked, but simply dispatched without evaluation. Did the troops want to see what they could get? Schmidt exploded over this mess up, but he could not change anything. Those responsible were somewhere warm and home, 2,000 kilometers away from Stalingrad. The divisional quartermasters received instructions to issue the few good items available to the fighting troops. This barely sufficed to clothe even a fifth of our soldiers huddling in the shelter trenches and bunkers of the Northern Front without stoves, without fuel, in the middle of the snow-covered steppe, swept by the biting northeasterly winds. While this was going on, the alarming reports arriving at Army headquarters were growing. Our nerves were stretched to breaking point. There was no doubt that the Soviet offensive was imminent. What would happen if the 11th Corps and the Romanian 5th Army failed to hold their positions? This was only a small part of Arno von Lenski's memories. I am waiting for your discussions in the comments. Also, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. See you all soon for now.